And you are recording.
Hello everybody, hello, welcome to Environmental Studies class. My name is Dr. Laist, and I'm here to talk a little bit about writing. I know you guys have a paper due coming up. Is that true, right?
Yeah.
You have a paper, and so you're probably starting to think about what you're going to write about and how you're going to write it and what you're going to talk about and all that kind of stuff. So basically I'm kind of here in a kind of a sort of a motivational role to kind of talk to you a little bit about the writing process. I know this isn't necessarily a writing class, but I want to talk to you a little bit about what I do and some of the techniques that I find are helpful when I'm doing any kind of writing, specifically academic writing, but it also, I would say, the same applies to any class that you take or to any other writing that you do outside of class, whether it's in an advocacy role as environmental students, or letters to the newspaper about local ecological issues that you want to raise attention toward, or any other writing projects that you might have to do. And so I find it helpful to think about the writing process as a three-step process, and each step is equally important. And you've probably heard this before in other writing classes. I'm an English teacher by trade, and so when you take an English class, you probably hear all the time people talk about the writing process. And the writing process really involves three steps. Talk about pre-writing, talk about the writing itself, the actual typing part, and then another part which we can just call post-writing. And it's really important, I think, to start off thinking about the writing process, not just as, you're going to sit down and write a paper, but as this kind of overall process that has a beginning and a middle and an end, that has kind of like a birth and a development, and finally that comes to fruition, not specifically in the paper that you write, although you're going to write a paper, but also more broadly just in the entire procedure of going through the steps and doing the thing and actually doing the thinking and also the evaluation and all the other things that you're going to do as part of the writing process. It's really helpful to think about the writing process as a three-step process because first of all, I think the most important thing that it communicates to you is that it's really important to schedule a lot of time before you begin, before the piece of writing is due. But also even before you just start writing at all. This is the most important thing that I or any other English teacher or any other teacher at all can tell you about writing, is that it takes time, and so the only way that you can possibly be successful as a writer of an individual paper, but also in general in your future career as someone who does writing as part of what you do, you need to make sure that you always schedule yourself lots and lots of time. I don't know, when is your paper due, for example, the paper that you guys are writing for this class? Is it due in like...
It'll be like the second week of December.
So that you still have about a month. That's ideal. To me, that's perfect. A month is the best amount of time that you could possibly have. And so now you shouldn't be thinking, oh, well, I'll get started on the paper in like 4 or 5 weeks or something, a week before it's due. No, you should get started on it right away. And some of the things that you can do just to get started are obviously part of the pre-writing step of the thing. And the first and most important thing about pre-writing is a very simple, prosaic, straightforward thing, time management. Especially a lot of us are students, we have families, we have jobs, we have all sorts of other community obligations and things like that. It's very important that right now, a month before your paper is due, you think week by week, when am I going to have a couple hours here, a couple hours there, to schedule time, make an appointment with myself, to sit down at a word processor or to go to the library and actually do the work of not just the writing itself, but also the researching, and even more importantly, the thinking. Because writing is not just about, like I said before, just about typing out the sentences on a page. People have an idea that the ideal writer is someone who just sits down and they're so brilliant or they're so good at writing that they can just sit down and type, and in a few hours they have 5 or 6 pages worth of paper and they're done. Nobody does that, even people who are really good writers, and I would say especially people who are really good writers, never work like that. They start off a month before the assignment is due, and they sit down and they say, all right, I'm not going to rely on inspiration. Inspiration is great if you're writing like poetry, or if you're, and even if you're writing poetry or anything else, a short story, whatever. Inspiration comes and goes, and you don't want to base your, your career and your academic success on something as fickle as inspiration. What is much more practical is to sit down and, like I say, look at your date book, schedule a few hours each week that you can sit down and work on the paper. I think the ideal thing, and I don't know, I think I've actually do some research on how the brain works, and I just find in my own work, sit down for 90 minutes. Give yourself a 90-minute block of time where you have no other responsibilities aside from to work on the paper. Then, if you have a flexible enough schedule, maybe take a 20-minute break, walk around the house, do some dishes, do some laundry, then come back for another 90 minutes. I think a 90-minute increment is a really good block of time. It's enough time to really devote some serious time to something, but not too much time that you get, blown away and you wind up procrastinating and, waiting, just wasting a lot of time. But obviously, if you leave it up to chance and you just say, all right, well, the next time the kids are happen to be out of the house, or the next time I happen to get a day off of work, or the next time, this happens, then you're not going to have any flexibility at all, and you're just going to have to write whenever you have to write. So, like I say, it's not romantic. It's not a brilliant insight. It's just a very basic thing. Time management, most important thing, especially if you're someone who is like a busy working adult with a family and lots of other responsibilities. Sometimes it helps to ask a friend if you can go over to their apartment for a few hours. Sometimes it helps to make arrangements for someone else to have the kids, so you can go visit the library for an hour or something like that. Make sure that you think about how to manage your time appropriately. Next thing is the next important thing under pre-writing is topic selection. In most courses, especially at this level of your studies, chances are you will have a lot of flexibility when it comes to what exactly you're going to have to write your paper about. In this class, I know that you probably have to do something like a lab report or some kind of study on some specific environmental issue or something like that. But obviously within those parameters, whether you write about pollution in the Connecticut River, or whether you write about the lobster fisheries in the Long Island Sound, what you want to do, and this is common sense, and again, probably if you've taken other English classes, other English teachers have told you the same thing, take a topic that makes sense to you, that corresponds or that lines up with first of all, with your personal interests, as as an individual, but also I think more importantly, with whatever your ideas about where you want your career to go might take you. I think a really good way to help you get through college or to get through a lot of projects is to think not just about one individual project and think one at a time. Think about your career. What is it? Why are you taking this class? Why are you pursuing this degree? Is there some way that you can shape this assignment so that the work that you do in this assignment isn't just for Bruce and for this class, but it really helps you in your life and gives you new information, new skills, and a new knowledge base that can help you build your future career. Obviously, some classes, some assignments will be more amenable to doing this kind of thing, but the golden situation is if you can arrange to write a paper that not only gets the assignment done, but that puts you on a path and that makes you feel like you're accomplishing something beyond just getting a good grade on the paper, that you're actually building your skills. So obviously that's going to help you because that is inherently motivating. Instead of just being motivated by getting a good grade or getting the paper done, you want to be motivated by actually helping yourself out and doing yourself, educating yourself in a meaningful way. So topic selection is very important. Try to think about your long-term goals, but also be yourself. Think about who you are and what motivates you, and sometimes even before you sit down and do any writing or any research at all, take a drive, sit in the bathtub, I don't know, lie in your bed or something like that. Think about what is it about me that I can bring to this assignment that I can make it so that I can make it about myself, so that I can make this something that I'm doing for me and not just for the class. Because that really should be the thrust of your education, especially as you get to these higher levels. You should be kind of more independent in terms of how you shape these assignments for your own purposes, to help you out in your career. The other important, and then we're getting kind of a little more specific about actual things that look more like writing. Of course, an important part, especially in an environmental studies class like this, an important part of the pre-writing process is accumulating lots of research and doing all the reading and other kinds of research that you might have to do in order to be able to make a coherent and well-informed argument about whatever you're writing about. But the thing about research, and it's kind of similar with writing, where people think of writing as just like the actual document that you spit out while you sit at your typewriter, whereas actually it's a much more involved process of thinking and learning and developing yourself. Research is the same. People have this idea that research is just a matter of sitting down, maybe Xeroxing some articles, and then highlighting them here and there, and just getting the gist of a few different articles. That's obviously a kind of research, but the kind of research that is really going to help you write these papers effectively is the kind of research that is not just a passive matter of absorbing information and writing down statistics, but is an active engagement with your research sources. Whenever you read an article or watch an informational video or study a phenomenon out in the field, you want to not just be like making observations and writing down quotes sort of verbatim or taking down statistics. You should always be thinking, how does this intersect with what I'm writing about? What questions does this raise? How can I argue with the findings of this particular article? Where can I fit what I'm learning into the project that I'm putting together? How do I agree or disagree with the findings of a specific piece of research? How does this data specifically relate to what I'm doing and to what I want to say? If you have this kind of active approach to research, then as you start to research, you'll actually be composing some of your paper as you go along. You'll come across a quotation in an article. And instead of just highlighting it, or instead of just copying it down into your notes, or instead of just Xeroxing it or copying and pasting it into a Word document, take a few minutes whenever you highlight something and ask yourself, why am I highlighting this? How is this going to intersect with the rest of my paper? How can I challenge or build on what this quotation suggests, or what this research finding, where this research finding points me? What I mean about active research is not just passively taking things down, but actively challenging and thinking and being very self-aware as you go through the research process. Phil?
Yeah, and actually, what is our paper about?
That's a good question.
That's a good question.
Huh?
We'll find out later.
Yeah, we'll find out later. I mean, it's good. It sounds like Bruce is leaving it kind of open for you, so that's very nice, especially when it comes to thinking about how you can select a topic that's going to line up with your, your career goals and your interests and your hobbies and your, self as a human being. So when you do research, always be very active, ask questions, and all that kind of thing. Finally, the last thing I want to talk about in terms of the pre-writing process is what I'm going to call I'm taking an aerial view of your project as a whole. Dr. Morin hasn't specifically said yet. I think he, let's say, but for example, different assignments. Say, first of all, the parameters of the assignment, whatever it is that you're going to be writing about, there will be probably some kind of page length recommendation, 7 to 10 pages or something like that. I don't know. With that, maybe less, maybe more. Maybe 5 to 7 pages. I don't know. Whatever it is. 10 to 15. Okay. Just for you, all right. Well, whatever it is, I think, sometimes people say, well, what difference does it make? I'm just going to talk for as long as, I have stuff to say. What difference, the length, what difference should that make? It shouldn't make a difference. It actually does make a difference. Length is like a really good starting point. And once you know how much you have to write, then you can kind of go back and figure out how you're going to fill in those pages. But if you're writing about, say, global warming or something, obviously you're going to take a very different approach if you're writing a paragraph versus if you're writing a 10-page paper or if you're writing a book or something like that about global warming. Knowing the length of the assignment is a very helpful way to give you a very clear indication of how you need to shape your activity to make sure that you develop the paper of the required length. So obviously you want to know like how many pages you're writing, but then once you know that, you can do the next step, which is I think even more important, which actually helps us to merge from the pre-writing process to the actual writing process. And that is something that you've probably heard of in a lot of other English classes, putting together an outline. An outline, I like to start thinking about this aerial view as 7 pages. So I have 7 pages. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages. I know that I'm going to start off here. There's probably going to be like an introductory paragraph. Then maybe, let's see, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Maybe I'll have 10, 11, 12 paragraphs all together. That's going to be what my paper is going to look like. Before I even start writing, before I even know what my topic is, if I can have a sense of what the overall picture of my paper is going to look like, I'm in a really good shape. And then I can, even before I've written it, I can ask myself, what kinds of sentences would appear on page 3? What kinds of things am I going to have to talk about by the end of this paper in order to have done what I set out to do? And if you can kind of imagine what your paper will look like, kind of have a pre-vision of your paper, even before you sit down to write it, then you've actually done a lot of the work already. And now the next step is just going back and filling in the blank spaces on your outline. For example, say you're writing about, and now you can even get a little more specific. Now I know in general I'm going to have like 12 paragraphs or something. And again, there are many different ways of setting up a paper. I'm sure Bruce can help you go through some different strategies. But say I'm writing about like PCBs in the water. And I have no other, maybe my thesis or my topic is just that they're bad, and we should be aware that there are PCBs in many of our Connecticut lakes and rivers, and this is something that we should know more about, and something that we should promote awareness of. Okay, so now I know I'm going to write like a 10-page paper or a 7-page paper about PCBs in the water. Certain things that I need to know. Obviously, what are PCBs? Where are PCBs? Where do they come from? Maybe, let's see, effects on the environment. Maybe I want to think about a couple of different, I want to think about wildlife, but I also want to think about plant life, and maybe also about human life, certainly. How do these things affect us? And finally, what can be done about it? And of course, I'm just like making this up as I go along, so I might have missed a lot of other things. And maybe there are a few different things that can be done about it. I have 1, 2, 3 suggestions about things that we can do to limit the amount of PCBs in the water. So let's add 1, 2, 3, wildlife, plants, human life, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 things that can be done about it. I have like 9 paragraphs. Throw on an introduction and a conclusion, I'm up to 11 paragraphs. And that's about where I want to be. I've covered the thing about PCBs. And now, not only have I covered the thing about PCBs, and again, this is just obviously a very quick, hasty estimation of what an outline for a paper like this would look like, but I also know specifically what kind of information I need to fill in the different parts of this paragraph, of this essay. My research is going to be much more focused because I want to try to figure out what I can say about wildlife, plant life, human life, what I can say about where they come from and where they are and all that kind of thing. But also I feel like I've gone from having no idea what I'm going to write about to actually having a pretty clear indication of what is going to be happening from paragraph to paragraph and page to page in my paper. And I feel much more confident going forward that instead of having one big massive assignment that I don't entirely understand, I have 12 or so very simple assignments that I can click off one at a time. Maybe I can do a few in 90 minutes, and then if I have 3 or 4 90-minute sessions, I've written my whole paper. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. A professor told me once upon a time that when writing an essay, you should write it as if the person reading it has absolutely no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Would you have anything to add or take away from that statement?
Yes, I would, as a matter of fact. I would have something, well, what I would say is that it depends on the class and the situation. In this class, you're writing, I would imagine, kind of scientific research reports.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, you want to target your, what you say to that audience, which is probably a group of other people who know about science and know about environmental issues, but maybe don't know a lot about exactly what you're talking about. Maybe they know about, PCBs, but they don't realize how invasive they are or what a problem they are. But that's going to be, it's going to differ based on your class. What I would say though, and I think this kind of helps me get to the first point that I have about the actual, there it is, writing process, which is my first piece of advice. I would say, like I say, it's going to be different whether you're writing whether you're writing for science class, or whether you're writing for English class, or whether you're writing a letter to the editor in a newspaper, or whether you're writing a white paper for some kind of a organization. But my advice, especially for a first draft, is always talk to mom. You know, for those of you who don't like your mom or have a good relationship with your mom, or who don't talk to your mom, think of somebody else. You know, talk to like Dave, the guy down the street, or your friend, or your sister, or your child. It's very easy, especially for student writers, and even for professional writers, to get so tangled up in big words, in like trying to sound professional, and in all of these different kinds of concerns that have nothing to do with their actual subject, but are more concerned about how they present themselves in writing, that they descend into gobbledygook, and they lose their focus, and they make things much more difficult than they have to be. My advice for all writers, especially student writers, is to just sit down and explain it like you would explain it to someone who doesn't, who's not a complete moron, but someone who doesn't really just know too much about what you know about. Once you've done that, it's a lot easier. Once you can visualize that audience in your head, for example, your mom sitting down and being like, well, explain this whole PCB thing to me. You have to start at the beginning. You say, well, PCBs are like this, they do this, and this is the problem, and this is where they come from, et cetera, et cetera. And you're less likely to be worried about, like, do I sound like a scientist? Do I sound like I know what I'm talking about? I find this extremely helpful, and chances are, if you can't explain what you're talking about to your mom, then you don't understand it as well as you may think you do. Sometimes it's very difficult for a writer to even figure out what they know versus what they still have to figure out, because they're so, so concerned with sounding like they know what they're talking about that they forget to actually just get straight in their own minds what they're talking about. So, talk to mom. Another strategy that I have for the actual writing process is to develop a ritual. We already talked a little bit about scheduling time, and this is very important, but once you have your 90-minute block of time, or your maybe 2 90-minute blocks of time back to back, once you have that time scheduled out, what are you going to actually do during that time? Obviously it depends on where you are and what your setting is, but I think the ideal situation for everyone would be, first of all, you want to be somewhere where you have a computer that you know how to use and that you're familiar with. You want to be somewhere where you have quiet. You want to unplug. Another big myth, in addition to the myth of inspiration, is the myth of multitasking. There's no such thing as multitasking. You can't do it. It can't be done. All you can do is a few different things poorly at the same time. Don't be on your email while you're also writing a paper. Turn off your phone. If you don't, a lot of people like to listen to music. I say don't listen to music, because what can it do aside from distract you? You really want to have all of your brain cells focusing so you can use that 90 minutes very efficiently, and then you can go listen to music and go on your email and stuff like that after you've cranked out 2 or 3 solid paragraphs. Again, different people have different works. But what I would say is that I'm a big fan of caffeine. I don't know if some of you might not drink caffeine for one reason or another, but I say whether it's caffeine or whether you work out before you start writing, or whether you have a special chair that you sit in, or maybe you just make yourself some hot chocolate. Do something to signal to your brain that you're sitting down and you're planning on being there for a while. And I feel like, if you smoke, sometimes it helps to have a cigarette, or do, whatever it is that you do that tells your body that you are like sitting somewhere and you're going to be there for a while. You're training yourself to sit down. And that's, and you know, something like, you know, writing is really difficult, and writing is really, can be very agonizing. And, you know, even very good writers, and maybe especially very good writers, you know, they spend a lot of time in a fetal position on the bathroom floor because they're like so anguished and frustrated that they can't come up with the words to say. So that's why it's helpful, even though maybe it's a little bit childish or maybe it's a little infantile or whatever, it's helpful to actually be able to say to yourself, this is something I'm doing as a way of kind of magically preparing myself to get into writing mode. And like I say, it's part magic, but really it's more just the willingness to sit down and do it. Phil? Do you
What if you can't sit down for like the 90 minutes? Because I can barely sit down for a 3-hour class.
Oh, well, that's, I mean, I'd say that, I would say that everyone has to adapt whatever works for you. You have to adapt to your own, you know what your bodily rhythms are. Maybe you're better in 45-minute spurts.
Because as you can see, I've changed my position at least 6 times since you've been talking.
Yeah, right, I mean,
20 minutes.
That's another important thing about writing on a regular basis. Even if you don't successfully get through the 90 minutes, or you do like half-hour spurts or something like that. But one way or the other, you're going to learn what works for you and what doesn't. You're going to learn about what rhythms or habits are helpful for you. And that's going to help you not only in this assignment, but throughout your careers and your lives as you have various writing projects that you have to accomplish. The more you know about yourself, the easier it will be for you to figure out how you need to organize your time in a way that best fits with your unique biochemistry. One more thing about the actual writing process. I'm putting down, write one thing at a time. Write about one thing at a time. It's very difficult when you're writing a 10-page paper or a 7-page paper because a 7-page paper contains hundreds of different ideas. And to read a 7-page paper is to go through those hundreds of ideas in, 10 minutes or whatever it takes to actually read the paper. But writing is crazy because you're producing something that takes maybe 10 minutes to read, but you're going to spend hours and hours and hours on it. The amount of thinking that you do over the course of this month-long procedure of writing your paper it reminds me of animation, where you hear about people have to, if they do a Mickey Mouse cartoon, they have to sit down for hundreds of hours to create 1 minute of animated film. The same is true of writing. That's why you can't just do it all at once, especially academic writing, which is very dense and pre-planned and thought out and is very packed from sentence to sentence with different ideas coming together in different kinds of ways. So this is actually a lot to process. It's a lot for your reader to process, but it's obviously a lot more for you to process because you have to figure out what you're going to put in, what you're going to leave out, all this thing. So going back to this idea of the outline and going back to this idea of thinking about your paragraphs one by one, that helps you when you sit down and when you're actually sitting at your computer, you've done your ritual, you've scheduled your time, you've done your active research, you've done all this stuff, and you're actually writing. Now you can actually ask yourself, what sentence do I have to write next? And usually, if you've done enough pre-planning, and you've done enough research, and you've done enough outlining, you can, even if you don't know what the sentence is going to sound like, how it's going to start, or how it's going to end, you know basically what it should say. I know this is the first sentence of my paragraph about the effects of PCBs on wildlife. Without knowing anything about it, I know that the first sentence is going to say something like,
the effect that the PCBs have on the environment is...
PCBs can have very deleterious effects on wildlife in aquatic environments. There's my first sentence. My second sentence is, for example, and here's where I'm going to use my active research. Morton has discovered that certain kinds of eels in the Connecticut River have developed strange mutations that allow them to whatever, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, that's probably not true, but try to figure out whatever it is that would go here. And if you've done your research, even, like I say, even if you don't know the content of what your sentences are going to be, well, I'm going to have a few different examples of how PCBs have had deleterious effects on wildlife in the rivers. Okay, so that's, and so you want to tell yourself that writing is not really so much like it's a lot of things, but one of the things that it is like building a wall out of bricks, and you just put one brick after another, and before you know it, you have a structure that's large enough that it actually surprises maybe even you coming back and being like, wow, I can't believe that the process of just putting one small brick after another has developed into this enormous thing that I'm very proud of and that I'm surprised came out of me. Okay, and there's a few more. Then there's the most fun part of writing, the post-writing block, which I just want to talk about briefly. I have a few suggestions for what you should do after you finish the first draft of your paper. First thing you should do is give yourself a week. Take a week, and this is, again, obviously, if you have planned ahead, you can do this. If you're not planned ahead and you're doing it the night before, this is obviously not an option. But if it's at all an option, try to finish your paper at least a week before it's due. Maybe a little bit more than a week. Not only does that give you a lot of, a huge relief from stress, because you don't have to be worried about, filling in everything in the last minute, but this gives you the chance to sit down, get it out of your head, occupy your head with other normal things that have nothing to do with PCBs, and then come back a week later or 5 or 6 days later, read through your paper, ask yourself, if I was my mother or if I was somebody else, would this make sense? And usually after that, you get so involved in a writing process and it becomes such an emotional, personal, tormenting ordeal that sometimes it's easy to lose the big picture. Take a week, come back, and you can have kind of a clearer focus on what you've done. And chances are, well, not just chances are, there is a 99.9% likelihood, first of all, that you're going to find a ton of simple, common proofreading errors that you didn't realize that you made. Second of all, you're going to come across a number of sentences where you're going to say, even if you're not like a great writer or you don't know anything about sentences, you'll still be able to go be like, oh wait, that sentence just doesn't make any sense. The first part doesn't match the second part, or it has like things that don't make sense. And you just go through, and with that new set of eyes, once you get out from under the weight of having just to do the paper, then you can come back to it as sort of a more leisurely third-person perspective and make sense of it.
I only give my papers to other people to read because the way I proofread is like I proofread the eyes of how I'm going to look at it, and so like I'll read a word that's not even there, or like I'll take a word that isn't quite, it's like the word I want to be there, but it's not.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So I'll give someone else, it's like, that's completely wrong, I get like, ink up my page, I'm like, oh, okay.
That's a great idea. If you have someone that you trust and that is willing to be a good enough friend to sit down and actually give you feedback about your paper, what a great idea. And what a wonderful friend to sit down and do that for you. Maybe even your professor would be willing to perform that role, him or herself. Read it out loud to yourself, if you can't find somebody else, that's what I wrote down here. Read it out loud to yourself. Oftentimes, when you're writing silently, you miss words, you don't realize. When you read it out loud, you catch things, especially if you're more of a verbal person than a writing person, which most people are. Read it to mom, read it to your mom. Be like, hey mom, I wrote you a paper about PCBs. And I'm sure she'd be really interested to hear it. Just the act of that, I think it's very helpful, and not only does it help you kind of hear what you sound like as a writer, but also it's a good test to see, are you communicating effectively? Did your points come across? Maybe you'll think, like, did I leave something out? Like, oh, I wrote this whole paper about PCBs, and I never even said, like, what PCB stands for, or what the chemical composition of PCBs are, or what their industrial use is, or, chances, or your mom might actually sit down and be like, so what are PCBs used for in the first place? Why did they ever come up with them in the first place? And you'd be like, oh, I have to put that in the paper. It goes right in, and then you slip it in. But that's, if you have a week to go, that's not a stressful situation because you have plenty of time to play around. Use spell check and grammar check on your word processing program. Use them responsibly. Chances are, if you have a red or green squiggly line, 9 times out of 10 you spelled something wrong or you have a grammar mistake. But sometimes the grammar check thing makes mistakes too. I would say be very respectful of the green and red lines because most of the time they can help you out. But also, of course, sometimes you know what you're saying and the spell check thing just doesn't get it, or grammar check just doesn't get it, and that's fine too. But just you should just be aware of those resources. And then finally, I have one more suggestion, is that for the post-writing process, which is maybe even the most important suggestion. So now that you have a week before your due date to sit around and think about your paper, what can you do, now that you've written your paper, revised it, read it to your mom, done all this work, what can you do to kick it up a notch? What can you do to make this paper even better than it already is? Can you add graphics or charts? Can you rewrite the introduction or conclusion to make it a little more meaningful? Can you include footnotes or other information that is not was not in the original draft or the original revision that can take your paper from wherever it is now to the next level? Again, if you're just trying to make the deadline and you're always rushed and you do the whole thing the night before, this is the kind of question that you do not have the luxury of asking yourself. But if you finish a week early and you have some time and you've managed your time well and you're good, responsible students and everything like that, then you do have the time to ask yourself, here I've put all this work into this paper and I think I've done a pretty good job. Now what can I do to do an extraordinary job? And if you can ask yourself of that not only of this specific paper, but really of everything that you do, in your life, then, obviously it's a real, it's a real metaphor for everything that you do in your life, and your writing should be. Your writing is, I think, when you write something and when you hand it in to your instructor, what you write, no matter what you write it actually about, whether it's PCBs or any other global warming or any number of other things, what that paper is really about is about you. It's an expression of who you are, what your values are, how you work as a student, how you use language, how you use ideas. In a way, it's almost startling and disturbing how much writing reveals about your past and your future and your identity. And so you might as well, so if you make your writing well, and if you can put your best self into your writing, then you can really use that as a template for trying to put your best self into everything that you do in your whole life as a student, but also as a human being and as an employee and as everything else that you are. So thank you very much for listening to me as I talk about the writing process, and I wish you all the best of luck with your papers in the future. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.